Now we take a look at news from the international arena. A day after the rescue of 33 miners from an underground cavern in Chilean mine, the media horde that descended on the rural region is leaving town, and the families of the miners who have held vigil outside the mine are looking forward to going home. Many of the reporters and television cameras have already left the encampment at the San Jose mine. Signs for the rescued miners still cover the walls and fences of the area as relatives with an air of calm pick up their belongings and prepare to leave. As the celebration fades, several key questions await resolution. Officials at the copper and gold mine, whose collapse trapped the 33 men for more than 2 months, still have to answer why it was allowed to operate at all. Attention will also be focused in coming days on the rescued miners themselves. Their emotional scars must be tended, and eventually it remains to be seen how many will want to return to the underground profession that nearly killed them. President Sebastián Piñera was unequivocal after Wednesday's rescue that the San Jose mine would never open again. Chile erupted in wild celebration on Wednesday as the operation to rescue 33 trapped miners came to a successful end. As the camp city set up at the San Jose minehead, journalists from 600 media organizations covering the rescue joined families, friends, rescue workers and sympathizers in a spontaneous outburst of dancing and singing. Some appeared in fancy dress while the others had a good time, spraying champagne all over in range of simply waving a flag, throwing a steamer or downing a bottle or two. In nearby Copiapo, about 3,000 people gathered in the town square where a huge screen broadcast live footage of the rescue. Once the last of the 33 miners emerged from the shaft, the iconic square erupted into celebrations with many overcome with emotion. The rescue exceeded expectations every step of the way. Officials first said it might be 4 months before they could get the men out. It turned out to be 69 days and about 8 hours. Lawyers for the families of victims of the Israeli raid on a Gaza-bound flotilla in May on Thursday took their case to the International Criminal Court (ICC) in The Hague, Netherlands.
Lawyers representing the 9 victims of Israel's deadly storming of a Gaza-bound flotilla in May have called on the International Criminal Court to punish those responsible. They had earlier sent a letter to the ICC prosecutor in The Hague, Luis Moreno Ocampo, which they say contained compelling evidence against the Israeli commandos. On May 31st, Israeli commandos stormed a flotilla of 6 ships which were on their way to Gaza with the intention of delivering humanitarian aid. 8 Turkish nationals and 1 U.S. citizen of Turkish descent were killed when Israeli forces boarded the Mavi Marmara, prompting sharp international condemnation and 2 United Nations investigations of the raid. 8 Turkish nationals and 1 U.S. citizen of Turkish descent were killed when Israeli forces boarded the Mavi Marmara, prompting sharp international condemnation and 2 United Nations investigations of the raid. Israel claims its soldiers acted in self-defense during the raid, which took place in international waters. Lawyers and relatives of the victims traveled to The Hague on Thursday to formally lodge their complaint. The ICC can investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide, and can bring charges against an individual if crimes were committed on the territory of a state which is a member of the court, or if the individual is a national of one of its member states. However, Israel does not recognize the ICC. Lawyers argue the court had jurisdiction because the Mary Marmara was flying the flag of ICC member the Comoros Islands. Ahmed Dogan, the father of Furkan Dogan, who at 19 was the youngest raid victim, said he had confidence in the ICC. Speaking outside the court on Thursday, Dogan said, "I believe that the people who killed my son will be prosecuted," but he said realized that the case had an international and political dimension which may put it under question. His son, who was Turkish-American, was shot 5 times, including 4 times in the head. The United Nations Human Rights Council last month agreed to back a report which found clear evidence for legal action against Israel over the attack on the flotilla. The inquiry said Israel broke international humanitarian and human rights law and found clear evidence to support prosecutions for crimes including willful killing, torture or inhuman treatment, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health. Israel had rejected the investigation from the outset, but it is backing another separate inquiry set up by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the incident and is conducting its own inquiry.
On the second day of his visit to Lebanon, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad meets with Lebanese politicians in Beirut to discuss the latest developments in the Middle East. Ahmadinejad arrived in Lebanon on Wednesday to a rapturous welcome organized by the Shia militant group Hezbollah. Iran is the main patron of the group, the most powerful military force in Lebanon.
During a meeting with Lebanese politicians on Thursday morning, Ahmadinejad repeated controversial remarks on the September 11th attacks in the US, again suggesting the need for an investigation to find the truth about the incident. Last month, Ahmadinejad made remarks at the UN in which he claimed most people in the world believed that the United States was behind the attacks. US President Barack Obama has accused Ahmadinejad of making offensive and hateful comments. He also once again said the Holocaust has been using as an excuse for occupying our region. The Iranian president has become a lightning rod overseas for his statements questioning the Holocaust and his defense of Iran's nuclear program, which the US suspects is intent for weapons, not energy, as Tehran insists. Later in the day, Ahmadinejad met with Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri, the two leaders reviewing a guard of honor before holding talks. Allies of Lebanon's Western-backed mainly Sunni coalition, which is led by Hariri, have expressed concern over Ahmadinejad's visit. A group of 250 politicians, lawyers and activists wrote an open letter to Ahmadinejad criticizing his support of Hezbollah.
Riot police clashes with protesting workers barricading Athens' ancient Acropolis on Thursday, using tear gas to clear the demonstrators from the entrance to Greece's most famous ancient site. Up to 100 Culture Ministry workers had shut down the Acropolis on Wednesday morning, complaining they were owed up to 22 months' worth of back pay. The protesters barricaded themselves inside, padlocked the entrance gates and refused to allow any tourists in until their demands were met. Police in riot gear arrived on Thursday morning after a court order said that the protesters were hindering access to an ancient site and its 2,500-year-old marble temples. At least one protester was led away in handcuffs to a waiting police bus. Dozens of bemused tourists who had arrived early on Thursday morning to visit the ancient site looked on as the standoff unfolded. Greece is in the midst of a tough austerity program which has cut public workers' salaries and trimmed pensions in an effort to pull the country out of a severe debt crisis. The austerity plan has led to a series of strikes and demonstrations as workers' union protest the cutbacks. Guards and workers at archaeological sites have long been complaining they were owed months of back pay and have shut down the Acropolis before in protest, though usually only for a few hours at a time. But authorities are often sensitive to protests at the emblematic ancient site, particularly as the country largely relies on tourism for revenue. A major Berlin museum on Wednesday previewed an exhibition that seeks to explore how Adolf Hitler won and held on to mass support among Germans for his Nazi regime.
Hitler and the Germans, Nation in Crime opens at the German Historical Museum on Friday and runs until February 6th. The collection of some 600 exhibits along with 400 photos and posters takes visitors chronologically through the life of the regime. The exhibition shows artifacts such as Hitler busts and uniforms of Nazi organizations with footage of events such as the book burning, emblematic step in Hitler's seizure of power. It stresses the extent to which Nazi persecution of the Jews and others was conducted in full public view. Germany has seen many exhibitions exploring the events of the Nazi era, but this one puts Hitler himself more squarely at the forefront. It comes more than 75 years after the Nazis took control, as Germans increasingly look at Hitler not just as one-dimensional tyrant, but as a man who enjoyed vast popularity before plunging the country into war. Nearly three-quarters of the material comes from the museum's own extensive stores. It portrays the Nazis' dual approach of making the German masses feel included in their movement, illustrated by a case full of various Nazi organizations' uniforms and a Nazi relief flag, while excluding those whom they had identified as enemies, such as Jews. Curator of the exhibition, Hans Ulrich Thammer, said the aim was to explore how Hitler's power and influence could be explained. The exhibition shows Hitler's ubiquity in Nazis' era German life in everything down to playing cards, yet the curators steered clear of securing any personal belongings of the dictator. Hitler himself had little natural charisma, but after ignominious defeat of the First World War, people looked to him to bring salvation and national healing. That led to growing support as Germans hit by the economic misery of the 1920s looked for a strong leader, which Hitler offered in the shape of Jews. Germany has become increasingly comfortable with confronting phenomenon of Hitler's rule directly over time. In recent years, Hitler has been the subject of one German film portraying his final days, downfall, and another portraying him as a comical idiot, Mein Führer, the truest truth about Adolf Hitler. He also has appeared as a waxwork at Berlin branch of Madame Tussauds, but on the opening day of museum in July 2008, an enraged visitor ripped the head off the exhibit.
A former Afghan president who heads the new Peace Council told reporters in Kabul on Thursday that the Taliban have not completely rejected the idea of negotiating a non-military solution to the war. The Afghan government has acknowledged that it has been involved in reconciliation talks with the Taliban, but discussions between the two sides have been described as mostly informal and indirect message exchanges relying on mediators. The Afghan Taliban, meanwhile, have denied having discussions. In a message posted on its website this week, the group said the notion of talks with the enemy was baseless propaganda and that negotiations would be a waste of time. In Brussels on Wednesday, a senior NATO official confirmed that it has provided safe passage for top Taliban leaders to travel to Kabul for face-to-face negotiations with the Afghan government. It was the most detailed indication so far of US and NATO support in clandestine talks aimed at bringing an end to the 9-year-old war.